I'm Rebecca Hartley, 34 years old, a high school English teacher from Portland, and the moment my mother-in-law Patricia announced she was giving each grandchild $10,000 for Christmas, I felt my stomach drop. Not because of the generosity, but because of the way her eyes deliberately skipped over my two daughters as she made the announcement. We were all gathered in her sprawling Victorian home in the suburbs, the kind of house that screamed old money and established lineage. My husband Marcus sat beside me on the antique sofa, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over our heads. Patricia stood by the marble fireplace, her perfectly coiffed silver hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier, looking every bit the family matriarch dispensing royal favors. She held a leather folder in her manicured hands, and her smile was warm as she addressed her assembled family. But when her gaze landed on my girls, 7-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Emma, that warmth evaporated like morning fog. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years, together for 10. We met at a community theater production where he was building sets and I was assistant directing. He had sawdust in his hair and paint on his hands, and when he smiled at me across the stage during rehearsal, I felt something shift in my chest. He was kind, funny, and refreshingly down to earth. What I didn't fully understand at the time was that he came from a family that valued pedigree above almost everything else. The Hartley family had been in Portland for 5 generations, owned a successful chain of high-end furniture stores, and considered themselves pillars of the community. Patricia, Marcus's mother, had very specific ideas about who was suitable for her only son. I was not that person. My background was decidedly working class. My father had been a mechanic who owned a small garage on the east side of town, and my mother worked as a nurse at the county hospital. They divorced when I was 12, and I was raised primarily by my mom in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. I put myself through college with scholarships, student loans, and weekend shifts waiting tables. I had no trust fund, no family estate, no connections to the social circles Patricia inhabited. What I did have was a genuine love for Marcus and a fierce determination to build a good life together. The first time Marcus brought me home to meet his family, I wore my best dress and brought flowers for his mother. Patricia accepted them with a thin smile and immediately handed them to the housekeeper without even looking at them. Throughout dinner, she asked pointed questions about my family background, my education, and my career prospects, each inquiry feeling less like polite interest and more like a job interview I was failing. Marcus's father, Richard, was kinder but distant, clearly deferring to his wife on all matters of family importance. Marcus's older sister, Victoria, observed me with cool assessment, while his younger brother, Christopher, seemed genuinely friendly but too young to challenge the family dynamics. Over the years, I tried everything to win Patricia's approval. I learned which topics to avoid, which compliments she preferred, how to dress for family occasions to meet her unspoken standards. I volunteered for her charity committees, attended her garden parties, and never once complained when she made subtle digs about my background. When Marcus and I got engaged, Patricia suggested we have a small ceremony because, as she delicately put it, there was no point in a large wedding when the bride's family was so limited. We complied. When we bought our first house, a charming but modest bungalow in a developing neighborhood, Patricia remarked that it was quaint, which I knew was her code for inadequate. The birth of Sophie should have been a turning point. She was Patricia's first grandchild, and I hoped becoming a grandmother would soften her toward me. Instead, it seemed to intensify her critical eye. She had opinions about everything from the name we chose to the way I chose to feed her. She bought expensive baby clothes that didn't fit Sophie's personality and gave unsolicited advice about parenting that contradicted everything Marcus and I had researched and agreed upon. When Emma was born 2 years later, Patricia's interest seemed even more perfunctory. She sent a card and a savings bond, but didn't visit the hospital. She was too busy with a cruise she had planned months in advance. Meanwhile, Victoria had married Preston Whitmore, whose family owned a regional banking empire. Their union was everything Patricia had dreamed of for her children, a merging of 2 prominent families with the right bloodlines and social connections. When Victoria and Preston had their son, Alexander, 3 years ago, Patricia was overjoyed. She threw a lavish christening party, established a substantial trust fund, and began treating Alexander like the crown prince of the family. Christopher, who was still single and working in the family business, remained in good standing simply by not marrying someone Patricia considered unsuitable. Family gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable for me. Patricia would gush over Alexander, showering him with attention and expensive gifts, while my daughters were acknowledged with polite distance. She remembered every detail about Alexander's preschool achievements and soccer games but could never quite recall what grade Sophie was in or what Emma's favorite color was. The comparisons were never explicit, but they were constant. She displayed dozens of photos of Alexander throughout her house but kept only one formal family portrait that included Sophie and Emma, and even in that photo, they were positioned at the edge of the frame. Marcus noticed some of this, but like many men raised by strong mothers, he had developed a reflexive defensiveness about her behavior. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he would say. "That's just her personality. She's particular about things." When I tried to point out specific instances of favoritism or exclusion, he accused me of being overly sensitive or looking for problems where none existed. His sister Victoria seemed to actively encourage Patricia's treatment of my daughters, perhaps enjoying the elevated status her son received by comparison. Christopher tried to be neutral, occasionally making efforts to engage with Sophie and Emma, but he was careful never to contradict his mother. The Christmas announcement happened during our annual holiday gathering, a formal affair that Patricia hosted every year on the first Sunday of December. The house was decorated like something from a magazine spread, with a 12-foot tree in the front parlor, garlands draping every surface, and enough poinsettias to supply a small florist. Patricia always wore something elegant and seasonal, this year a cream-colored cashmere dress with pearls. The rest of us were expected to dress accordingly, which meant I had spent money we didn't really have on new outfits for the girls and myself to meet Patricia's standards. We arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as required. Patricia greeted Marcus with a warm embrace and a kiss on both cheeks, then turned to me with her standard cool smile. "Rebecca, how nice. The girls look presentable." Sophie and Emma, who had been coached to be on their best behavior, offered polite greetings that Patricia acknowledged with a distracted nod before turning her full attention back to Marcus. "Have you lost weight, darling? You look wonderful. You're not working too hard, are you?" Inside, the family was already assembled. Victoria sat on the damask sofa with Preston, while Alexander played quietly with an expensive wooden train set that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Christopher was reviewing something on his phone, and Richard was pouring drinks at the bar cart. The room fell into its familiar pattern with Marcus gravitating toward his father and brother to discuss business, Victoria monopolizing her mother's attention, and me left to occupy the children on the periphery of the gathering. Sophie, always perceptive beyond her years, whispered to me as we sat in the corner with a picture book. "Why doesn't Grandma Patricia hug us like she hugs Alexander?" I gave her the same answer I always did. "Everyone shows love differently, sweetheart." But I could see the confusion in her eyes, the beginning awareness that something wasn't quite right about how we fit into this family. After an elaborate afternoon tea that Patricia had catered from an upscale bakery, she asked everyone to gather in the living room. She had an important announcement to make. We all settled into our assigned positions, which somehow always placed my family furthest from the center of attention. Patricia stood by the fireplace, commanding the room with the ease of someone accustomed to being the focus. She explained that she and Richard had been discussing their legacy and the importance of providing for their grandchildren's future. They had decided to establish educational trusts for each grandchild, $10,000 to be held until college, a generous gift that would make a real difference. "Alexander will receive his trust today," Patricia announced, handing Victoria an elegant envelope. "We know you and Preston will invest it wisely for his future." Victoria accepted it with a gracious smile, hugging her mother and thanking her profusely. Alexander, too young to understand the significance, clapped his hands in imitation of the adult's approval. Then Patricia's expression shifted subtly as her eyes moved toward where I sat with Sophie and Emma on either side of me. There was a long pause, and I felt my heart beginning to race. I had a terrible premonition about what was coming next. "Of course, this gift comes with certain expectations," Patricia continued, her voice taking on a crisper tone. It's intended for grandchildren who embody the Hartley family values, who will honor the legacy we've built, and who show promise of contributing meaningfully to society." The room had gone very quiet. Marcus was looking at his mother with a slightly puzzled expression, not yet understanding the direction this was taking. After careful consideration, Patricia said, her eyes now fixed directly on me rather than my daughters, "Richard and I have decided that Sophie and Emma will not be receiving trusts at this time." The words landed like physical blows. I felt Sophie stiffen beside me, old enough to understand that she had been excluded from something important. Emma, blessedly too young to fully grasp what was happening, continued playing with the ribbon on her dress. I opened my mouth to speak, but Patricia wasn't finished. "The Hartley legacy is precious to us, and we must be thoughtful about how we invest in the next generation. Alexander represents the kind of continuation of our family that we value. Perhaps in the future, when Sophie and Emma have demonstrated their commitment to Hartley family standards, we can revisit this decision." My face burned with humiliation and rage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was essentially saying my children weren't good enough, weren't worthy of being treated as equal members of this family. And she was doing it in front of everyone, making a public declaration of their inferior status. I looked at Marcus, desperately hoping he would say something, stand up for our daughters, challenge this outrageous favoritism. He sat frozen, his expression torn between shock and confusion. Victoria's face showed barely concealed satisfaction. Christopher looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Richard stared into his whiskey glass, apparently finding the ice cubes fascinating. "Mom," Marcus finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't Sophie and Emma receive the same gift as Alexander?" Patricia's smile was patronizing. "Darling, you know we've always had concerns about certain decisions you've made. We want to ensure the family legacy is preserved through grandchildren who will truly appreciate and uphold what we've built. This isn't personal, it's practical." "It's absolutely personal," I heard myself say, my voice shaking with the effort to remain controlled. "You're punishing my children because you've never accepted me." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Rebecca, I think you're being dramatic. This is a decision Richard and I made about our money and our legacy. We have every right to distribute our resources as we see fit." "You have the right to do whatever you want with your money," I agreed, standing up. "But you don't have the right to humiliate 7- and 5-year-old children by publicly declaring they're not good enough for this family. That's cruel, and if you can't see that, then I genuinely pity you." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. No one spoke to Patricia like that, especially not me, the daughter-in-law who had spent years trying to accommodate her every preference. Patricia's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, I took both my daughter's hands. "Come on, girls. We're leaving." Marcus stood up quickly. "Rebecca, wait. Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, fighting back tears of rage and hurt. "Your mother just told our daughters they're not worthy of being treated like family. I won't sit here and pretend that's acceptable." I guided Sophie and Emma toward the front door, grabbing our coats from the closet. Behind me, I could hear Marcus trying to mediate, his voice pleading with both his mother and me to calm down and discuss this rationally. But there was nothing rational about what had just happened. Patricia had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and whether Marcus realized it or not, this moment was going to define our marriage going forward. As I buckled the girls into their car seats, Sophie asked the question I had been dreading. "Mommy, why doesn't Grandma Patricia like us?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, sweetheart. But I need you to know that you and Emma are wonderful, valuable, loved little girls. Grandma Patricia's decision has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with her own issues. You deserve better than how she treated you today." Emma, still not fully understanding but picking up on the emotional energy, started crying. I held both of them for several minutes in the cold December air, their small bodies shaking with confused tears, while the warm glow of Patricia's perfectly decorated house mocked us from across the manicured lawn. Inside, I knew Marcus was facing a choice: stand with his wife and daughters, or continue to enable his mother's toxic behavior. I genuinely didn't know which he would choose. 20 minutes later, as I was driving aimlessly through Portland streets trying to calm down enough to go home, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice tight with stress. "Driving around. The girls needed time to decompress. Can you come home? We need to talk." I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and told the girls we were going to get hot chocolate, something to turn this awful afternoon into at least a small positive memory. While they sipped their drinks and colored on napkins, I stepped outside to continue the conversation with Marcus. He had left his parents' house shortly after I did, he explained, but not before having a heated argument with his mother. I told her she was wrong, Rebecca. I told her she hurt our daughters and that wasn't acceptable. It was the first time in our 8 years of marriage that Marcus had directly challenged his mother on my behalf, and I felt a small spark of hope. But then he continued. She's extremely upset. She feels disrespected and attacked. She says she was only trying to teach our girls the importance of earning rewards and living up to family standards. So she's turned herself into the victim, I said flatly. She humiliated our children in front of the entire family, but somehow she's the one who's been wronged. Marcus sighed heavily. I know it looks bad, but you know how my mother is. She has very specific ideas about things. Maybe if we go back and talk to her calmly, we can work this out. I felt the hope drain away as quickly as it had appeared. Marcus still didn't fully get it. He was still trying to smooth things over, to find a compromise between his mother's cruelty and his family's dignity. There is no working this out, I said firmly. Your mother made her position crystal clear. She doesn't consider our daughters equal members of this family. She thinks they need to earn basic respect and fair treatment. That's not a misunderstanding we can talk through. That's a fundamental statement about her values and priorities. But she's my mother, Marcus protested. I can't just cut her out of our lives. I'm not asking you to cut her out, I replied, watching through the coffee shop window as Sophie helped Emma draw a cat on her napkin. I'm saying we need to establish boundaries. Our daughters will not be subjected to situations where they're treated as less than. If your mother wants a relationship with them, she needs to treat them with the same love and respect she shows Alexander. Otherwise, we limit contact. Simple as that. The conversation went in circles for another 15 minutes, with Marcus torn between loyalty to his mother and protection of his daughters. We finally agreed to continue the discussion at home after the girls were in bed. As I drove us back to our bungalow, I felt exhausted and heartsick. This was supposed to be the beginning of the Christmas season, a time of joy and family togetherness. Instead, my daughters had learned a painful lesson about inequality and exclusion, and my marriage was facing its most serious test yet. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Marcus and I sat at our kitchen table with mugs of tea growing cold between us. He looked as drained as I felt. I never realized how much my mother's behavior affected you, he admitted. I always knew she could be difficult, but I thought you were handling it okay. I've been handling it by swallowing my feelings and trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, I told him honestly. But I won't do that at my daughter's expense. They're starting to notice, Marcus. Sophie asked me tonight why Grandma Patricia doesn't like them. She's 7 years old and she already knows she's treated differently than her cousin. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. What do you want me to do? Stand up to her, I said simply. Not just today, but consistently. When she makes comments about our house or my background or the way we're raising the girls, call her out. When she plans family events and excludes us or treats us as afterthoughts, address it directly. When she shows blatant favoritism toward Alexander, point it out and demand better. Be my partner in this, not her defender. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. And if she doesn't change? Then we limit her access to our family, I said. We don't attend every gathering. We don't subject the girls to environments where they're made to feel inferior. We build our own holiday traditions that don't revolve around seeking her approval. We protect our daughter's self-esteem and sense of worth, even if that means disappointing your mother. It was the most direct I had ever been about the situation, laying out clear expectations and consequences. Marcus looked torn, the weight of choosing between his birth family and his created family heavy on his shoulders. "I need time to think about all this," he finally said. "This is a lot to process." Over the next few days, our house existed in a state of tense limbo. Marcus worked longer hours than usual, clearly avoiding the situation. The girls seemed subdued, picking up on the stress even though we tried to shield them from it. My mother called to check in, having heard a brief version of events from me, and offered to come visit and provide support. Having her there, warm and accepting and genuinely delighted by her granddaughters, provided a stark contrast to Patricia's coldness. A week after the disastrous Christmas announcement, Victoria called me. Her tone was crisp and disapproving. "I understand you're upset about Mother's gift distribution," she began without preamble, "but walking out like that and causing a scene was incredibly immature. Your girls are young. They wouldn't have even understood what was happening if you hadn't made such a dramatic production of it." I took a slow breath before responding. My daughters understood perfectly that they were being excluded and treated as less valuable than their cousin. Patricia made sure everyone understood that by announcing it publicly rather than handling it privately. "And I notice you have no problem with the actual favoritism, only with my response to it." Victoria's laugh was dismissive. "Mother has always had certain standards. Alexander's parentage represents the kind of family alliance our parents value. You can't really expect them to treat all the grandchildren identically when the circumstances are so different." "The circumstances being that I'm not from the right social class," I said flatly. "Let me be very clear, Victoria. My daughters are just as valuable, just as worthy, just as much a part of this family as Alexander. If you and your mother can't see that, the problem is with your values, not with my children." She huffed indignantly. "You've always been so touchy about your background. No one cares where you came from. We've always been perfectly civil to you." "Civil isn't the same as accepting," I countered. "And yes, I am touchy about my background because people like you and Patricia use it as an excuse to treat me and my children as inferior. I'm done apologizing for not being born into wealth and pretending that your family's snobbery is just a personality quirk." The conversation ended shortly after that, with Victoria making it clear she sided entirely with her mother. I wasn't surprised, but it solidified my understanding of the family dynamics. Marcus would have to choose which side of this divide he wanted to be on, and that choice would determine the future of our marriage. 2 weeks after the Christmas announcement incident, Marcus finally broke his silence on the topic. He came home from work earlier than usual and found me in the kitchen helping Sophie with her homework while Emma built towers with wooden blocks on the floor. He kissed each of the girls on the head, then asked if we could talk after dinner. The weight in his voice told me this was the conversation we had been avoiding, the one that would determine what happened next. After we put the girls to bed, we returned to our usual spots at the kitchen table. Marcus had a folder with him, which he set down between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "And I talked to someone at work whose wife is a therapist. She recommended some resources about family dynamics and boundaries." He opened the folder to reveal printed articles about enmeshed families, toxic in-law relationships, and healthy boundary setting. "I've been reading these every night after you fall asleep," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And I've had to face some really uncomfortable truths about my family and about how I've failed you as a husband. Rebecca, I'm so sorry." I pushed one of the articles toward me. It was titled, "When Parents Compete with Spouses, Breaking Free from Emotional Incest." I looked up at Marcus in surprise. "Your coworker's wife recommended this specifically?" He nodded, his eyes wet. "After I told her about the Christmas thing and some other examples, she said my mother displays classic signs of emotional enmeshment with her children, especially her sons. She treats us like surrogate partners in some ways, expecting loyalty and priority that should go to our spouses. And I've been conditioned my whole life to see that as normal, as just my mom caring about her family." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I know this is hard for you to see. She's your mother. You love her. I do love her, Marcus agreed. But I love you more. And I love our daughters most of all. What she did was wrong, Rebecca. Not just wrong, but cruel. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized it wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the most blatant example of a pattern that's been there all along. He pulled out a notebook where he had written a timeline of incidents, things I had mentioned over the years and things he was now seeing with new clarity. The way she excluded you from family photos at our wedding reception. How she gave us a vacuum cleaner as a wedding gift while she gave Victoria and Preston a check for $10,000 for their honeymoon. The passive-aggressive comments about our neighborhood and our house. Her complete lack of interest in Sophie and Emma compared to her obsession with Alexander. Seeing it all laid out chronologically was overwhelming. Marcus had documented nearly 30 specific incidents spanning our entire relationship. I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it, he said quietly. It was easier to believe you were being sensitive than to accept that my mother was deliberately undermining our marriage and hurting our family. That makes me complicit in her behavior, and I'm ashamed of that. We sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what this acknowledgement meant. Then Marcus took a deep breath and continued. I called my mother yesterday and told her we needed to have a serious conversation. She tried to brush me off, said I was being dramatic just like you. So I told her that she had two choices. She could either agree to family counseling with all of us to work through these issues, or she could accept that her relationship with our family was going to be extremely limited going forward. My heart pounded. What did she say? She hung up on me, Marcus replied with a sad smile. Then she called back an hour later and said I was breaking her heart, that she had done nothing but love and support me my whole life, and she couldn't believe I was choosing you over her. I told her that framing it as a choice was exactly the problem, that a healthy parent doesn't make their child choose between them and their spouse. I felt tears streaming down my face. For 8 years, I had wanted Marcus to stand up for me like this, and now that he finally was, I felt a complicated mix of relief, sadness, and fear about what it might cost us. What happens now? I asked. Now we set boundaries and stick to them, Marcus said firmly. I've already started. I told my mother that we won't be attending any family gatherings until after the new year, and when we do resume contact, it will be on our terms with clear expectations about how she treats you and the girls. If she can't meet those expectations, we'll continue to limit contact. What about your father? And Victoria and Christopher? My dad called me this morning, actually, Marcus said. He apologized for not speaking up at the Christmas announcement. He said he's known for years that my mother crosses lines with you, but he's taken the path of least resistance by staying quiet. He wants to have a relationship with our family that's separate from my mother's drama, and I told him I'd like that too, as long as he respects our boundaries. As for Victoria, Marcus continued, his expression hardening, she made her position clear when she called to lecture you. She's fully aligned with our mother's worldview, and I don't expect that to change. We'll be civil when necessary, but I'm not interested in a close relationship with someone who thinks my daughters are inferior to her son. Christopher has been texting me trying to stay neutral, which I appreciate, but he needs to understand that neutrality in the face of injustice is actually a choice to side with the oppressor. I was stunned by this transformation in my husband. The man sitting across from me was someone I recognized from our early dating days, before the weight of family expectations had slowly bent him into someone who prioritized his mother's feelings over everything else. Where did all this clarity come from? I asked. Honestly? Seeing Sophie's face when my mother made that announcement, Marcus said, his voice breaking. She looked so confused and hurt, and she tried to be brave about it, but I could see her spirit crumpling. And I realized that if I didn't stand up for her now, she was going to grow up believing she wasn't good enough, that she had to earn love and acceptance from people who should give it freely. I couldn't let that happen. I won't let that happen. We spent the rest of the evening making a plan. We would establish clear boundaries with Patricia and communicate them in writing so there could be no misunderstanding. We would prioritize our nuclear family's well-being over extended family obligations. We would find a family therapist to help us navigate these changes and give the girls tools to process their feelings. And we would start building our own holiday traditions that didn't revolve around seeking Patricia's approval. The next morning, Marcus drafted an email to his mother. He showed it to me before sending it, and I was impressed by how clear and firm it was without being cruel. He outlined specific behaviors that were no longer acceptable, expressed his expectation that Sophie and Emma would be treated with the same love and respect as Alexander, and explained the consequences if these boundaries were violated. He acknowledged that Patricia was free to distribute her money however she chose, but that his family would not participate in events where his daughters were publicly humiliated or treated as lesser. Patricia's response came within an hour. It was a lengthy email filled with wounded feelings, accusations of betrayal, and predictions that Marcus would regret choosing his wife over his mother. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and that I had poisoned Marcus against her. She threatened to cut him out of the family business and the family inheritance. She said Victoria agreed with her completely and that Marcus was destroying the family over imagined slights. Marcus read the email once, then forwarded it to me with a single line of commentary. This is exactly the kind of manipulation the articles talked about. He didn't respond to her email, which I knew would infuriate Patricia more than any argument could. She was accustomed to being able to provoke reactions and control situations through emotional escalation. Marcus's refusal to engage in that pattern was a powerful statement. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued. Victoria called multiple times, alternating between trying to guilt Marcus into apologizing and making veiled threats about family consequences. Patricia sent a formal letter via her attorney requesting that we return various family heirlooms she had given us over the years, items that had sentimental value to Marcus. Richard called again, this time to warn us that Patricia was seriously considering changing her will to remove Marcus and our girls entirely. Through it all, Marcus remained steady. He consulted with our own attorney about the heirlooms, discovering that gifts couldn't be legally reclaimed and that Patricia's demands had no legal standing. He told his father that if Patricia wanted to use inheritance as a weapon, that was her choice, but it wouldn't change his decision to protect his family. He blocked Victoria's number after she sent a particularly nasty text about me being a gold digger who had never deserved to marry into their family. Meanwhile, our home life began to transform. Without the constant stress of upcoming family obligations and the anxiety of wondering when Patricia would next undermine us, there was a lightness in our house. We started having Saturday morning pancake breakfasts where the girls could request any shape they wanted. We established a Friday night family movie tradition with homemade pizza. We began volunteering together at a local animal shelter, something we had always wanted to do but never had time for between family obligations. Sophie and Emma noticed the change too. One evening as I was tucking Sophie into bed, she said, "Mommy, we haven't seen Grandma Patricia in a long time." "I know, sweetie," I replied carefully. "How do you feel about that?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't really miss her." "Is that bad?" I hugged her tight. "It's not bad at all. It's honest. People have to earn a place in our hearts through how they treat us, and Grandma Patricia hasn't treated you very kindly. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about that." "Does Daddy miss her?" Sophie asked. "I think he misses the mother he wishes he had," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes the people in our families aren't who we want them to be, and that's sad. But what matters most is that we take care of each other and surround ourselves with people who love us well." "Like Grandma Janet," Sophie said, referring to my mother who had become a warm and constant presence in our lives. "Exactly like Grandma Janet," I agreed. In January, we started family therapy with Dr. Martinez, a counselor who specialized in family systems and intergenerational trauma. She helped us process what had happened and gave us strategies for talking with the girls about it in age-appropriate ways. She also worked with Marcus on untangling his complex feelings about his mother, helping him grieve the relationship he wanted while accepting the reality of who Patricia actually was. During one particularly powerful session, Dr. Martinez asked Marcus to describe what he had hoped family would be like for his daughters. He talked about wanting them to feel unconditionally loved, to be celebrated for who they were, to grow up confident in their worth. Then she asked him to describe what actually happened at Patricia's house. As he recounted the Christmas announcement and other incidents, the contrast became painfully clear. The family environment he was defending bore no resemblance to the one he wanted for his children. "You've been trying to get your mother to become someone she's not," Dr. Martinez observed gently. "And in doing so, you've subjected your wife and daughters to an environment that contradicts your core values. What would it mean to accept that your mother is unlikely to change and make decisions based on that reality rather than on hope?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It would mean accepting that I can't have the mother I want and protecting my family from the mother I have. It would mean choosing present reality over past loyalty. It would mean growing up, fully, even if it's painful." Dr. Martinez nodded. Differentiation from family of origin is one of the hardest psychological tasks we face as adults. But it's also one of the most important, especially when you're trying to build a healthier family system for the next generation. February brought an unexpected development. Christopher, Marcus's younger brother, called to say he wanted to meet for coffee. Marcus was hesitant, worried it might be another attempt at family manipulation, but he agreed. They met at a neutral location, and Christopher was direct. "I need to tell you that I think you're right about Mom. I've been thinking a lot about how she treated Rebecca and the girls, and it's not okay. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make waves, but my silence made me part of the problem." Christopher went on to explain that he had been dating someone seriously for the past 6 months, a woman named Lily who was a public school art teacher from a middle-class background. He hadn't introduced Lily to the family yet because he was terrified of how Patricia would react. "Watching what happened with you has shown me what my future looks like if I don't set boundaries now," Christopher admitted. "I don't want Lily to go through what Rebecca has endured. I don't want my future kids to be treated the way Sophie and Emma have been treated." Marcus was moved by his brother's candor. They talked for over 2 hours about their mother's behavior patterns, the family dynamics that enabled it, and what it would take to break those cycles. Christopher asked for advice about how to introduce Lily to the family while maintaining firm boundaries. Marcus shared resources that had helped him and suggested that Christopher might benefit from his own therapy to prepare for the inevitable conflict with Patricia. As they parted, Christopher said something that stayed with Marcus. "You know, growing up, I always thought you were the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in Mom's eyes. But I realize now that being her favorite was actually a trap. She expected total loyalty and compliance in exchange for her approval. Victoria bought into that system completely, but you found a way out. I admire that, even if it's been messy." Marcus came home from that meeting with renewed conviction about the path we had chosen. Having his brother's support and validation meant more than he had expected. It also meant that cracks were forming in Patricia's control over the family narrative. She could no longer claim that everyone agreed with her and that Marcus and I were the problem. In March, Richard reached out to ask if he could take Sophie and Emma to the zoo for Grandparents' Day at their school. He wanted to be involved in their lives, he explained, and he understood that needed to happen separately from Patricia. After discussion, Marcus and I agreed, with the clear understanding that Richard would not use this access to pressure us about reconciling with Patricia or to relay messages from her. The zoo trip was a success. Richard was attentive and engaged with the girls in ways he never had been when Patricia was present. He asked them about their interests, listened to their stories, and bought them age-appropriate souvenirs instead of the expensive but impractical gifts Patricia favored. When he brought them home, he lingered for a few minutes to talk with us. "I owe you both an apology," he said quietly. "I've let Patricia control our family dynamics for 40 years, and I've watched her damage relationships without intervening. I thought keeping the peace was the right approach, but I see now that it just enabled her to keep hurting people. I can't change the past, but I'd like to have a real relationship with your family going forward, if you'll allow it." We appreciated Richard's accountability, though we were also realistic about the limits of what could change. He was still married to Patricia, still living in that house, still financially and emotionally entangled with her. We agreed to occasional outings with the girls and family dinners at our house, but we maintained clear boundaries about information sharing and participation in broader family events. April brought Sophie's 8th birthday. In previous years, we had held her party at our house but invited the entire Hartley family, resulting in events that felt more like Patricia's show than Sophie's celebration. This year, Sophie asked if we could do something different. She wanted to invite her school friends to a pottery painting studio, followed by pizza at our favorite local place. No extended family drama, just fun with people who actually cared about her. It was the best birthday party we had ever thrown. Sophie glowed with happiness as she and 8 classmates painted ceramic butterflies and told silly jokes. There were no passive-aggressive comments about our choices, no comparisons to how Victoria had done Alexander's birthday party, no tension about seating arrangements or gift hierarchies. Just pure, uncomplicated joy. My mother came and helped supervise, delighting in the chaos of 9 8-year-old girls. As we watched Sophie laughing with her friends, my mom leaned over and whispered, "This is what childhood should look like. Free and easy and full of love. You're giving them something precious by protecting them from toxicity." I felt tears prick my eyes because she was right. By setting boundaries with Patricia, we had created space for authentic happiness. The one shadow over the celebration came when Marcus checked his phone and found a bitter text from Victoria. "I see Sophie's birthday party was today. Nice of you to exclude the family. How are you going to explain to her when she's older that you kept her grandparents away from important milestones?" Marcus showed me the text and I watched him type out a response. Sophie's party included the people who love her and treat her with respect. That's not an exclusion, it's appropriate boundary setting. When you're ready to treat my daughter as you treat your son, we can revisit family involvement in celebrations. Victoria didn't respond, but Marcus didn't seem bothered by her silence. He had found a clarity about his priorities that no amount of guilt or manipulation could shake. Later that night, after the party detritus was cleaned up and the girls were asleep, Marcus pulled me into his arms. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he said. "I know there were times when you must have wanted to walk away, when it seemed like I would never choose you and the girls over my mother's dysfunction. I'm sorry it took so long." I hugged him back tightly. "We're here now. That's what matters. We're building something better for our daughters, showing them what healthy relationships actually look like. They'll grow up knowing their worth isn't conditional, that love doesn't have to be earned through perfect compliance. That's everything." In May, Dr. Martinez suggested we might be ready for a session where we drafted a letter to Patricia that we may or may not send. The purpose was to articulate our feelings and needs clearly, whether or not Patricia ever read them. Marcus and I spent several sessions working on this letter, processing years of hurt and frustration while also acknowledging the complicated love that still existed despite everything. The final letter was 3 pages long. It named specific hurtful behaviors, explained the impact they had on our family, and outlined what would need to change for a relationship to be possible. It wasn't angry or accusatory, just honest and clear. Marcus decided to send it via certified mail so we would know Patricia received it. We had no expectations about how she would respond, but we needed to know we had given her one final opportunity to choose relationship over control. Patricia's response arrived 2 weeks later, not to Marcus but to me. It was a 6-page handwritten letter on her expensive stationery, and it was one of the most manipulative pieces of communication I had ever received. She began by saying she had been praying for guidance and had concluded that I was the source of all the family problems. She accused me of being jealous of Victoria, of isolating Marcus from his family, of raising Sophie and Emma to be entitled and disrespectful. She claimed her Christmas decision had been about teaching the girls important life lessons about earning rewards, and that my dramatic reaction had traumatized the entire family. The letter went on to detail all the ways she had tried to welcome me into the family, conveniently rewriting history to paint herself as endlessly accommodating and me as perpetually ungrateful. She said she had consulted with her pastor, who agreed that children should honor their parents and that I was leading Marcus into sin by encouraging him to defy her. She concluded by saying she was willing to forgive me if I apologized publicly to the family and agreed to certain conditions going forward, including allowing her to have input on how we raised the girls and accepting that Alexander, as the eldest grandson from the preferred lineage, would always hold a special place. I read the letter twice, feeling my blood pressure rise with each sentence. Then I showed it to Marcus. He read it in silence, his expression darkening with each paragraph. When he finished, he very carefully folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and said, "This is gaslighting. Pure, textbook gaslighting." She's rewriting reality to make herself the victim and you the villain. This is exactly what the therapist warned us about. What do you want to do with it? I asked. Marcus thought for a moment. I want to document it as evidence of her unwillingness to take accountability or change. Then I want to file it away and move on with our lives. She's had her chance to respond with honesty and humility, and she chose manipulation instead. That tells us everything we need to know. We brought the letter to our next therapy session, and Dr. Martinez helped us analyze the manipulation tactics it employed. Projection, blame shifting, historical revisionism, conditional forgiveness, appeals to religious authority to justify control. It was a masterclass in emotional abuse, she observed. And the fact that she sent it to Rebecca instead of Marcus shows she still doesn't see Rebecca as a real person with agency. She sees her as a problem to be managed or eliminated. This session was a turning point for me. I had spent 8 years wondering if I was too sensitive, too demanding, too unwilling to overlook minor slights for the sake of family harmony. But seeing my experiences validated by a professional, seeing the manipulation techniques named and explained, I finally released the burden of self-doubt I had been carrying. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. The problem was a family system that valued conformity over authenticity and control over love. Summer arrived with a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. We took the girls camping in the Cascade Mountains, just the 4 of us, without worrying about family obligations or explaining our absence to anyone. Sophie caught her first fish and Emma discovered she loved roasting marshmallows until they were completely charred. We hiked trails, swam in cold mountain lakes, and told stories around the campfire. Marcus was more relaxed than I had seen him since our early dating days, finally free from the constant pressure of managing his mother's expectations. When we returned home, there was a message from Christopher. He had introduced Lily to Patricia, and it had gone exactly as badly as he had feared. Patricia had been coldly polite during the initial meeting, then later told Christopher privately that Lily was unsuitable and that he should end the relationship before getting too serious. Christopher had responded by proposing to Lily the following week. He wanted us to know because he and Lily were planning a small wedding and hoped we would come, even though it would likely mean encountering Patricia and Victoria. Marcus and I discussed it carefully. We wanted to support Christopher, but we also needed to protect our family from Patricia's toxicity. We decided to attend the wedding with clear boundaries. We would arrive at the ceremony, stay for the reception, and leave if Patricia created any drama. We prepared the girls in advance, explaining that we would see Grandma Patricia there but that we wouldn't be staying long. The wedding was beautiful, held in a botanical garden with Lily's art students providing handmade decorations. Patricia sat in the front row looking like she was attending a funeral rather than a celebration. Victoria whispered loudly to Preston throughout the ceremony about how small and informal everything was. But Christopher and Lily looked radiantly happy, and that was what mattered. At the reception, Patricia made a beeline for Marcus the moment we entered. She gripped his arm and said loudly enough for others to hear that she had missed him terribly and hoped this wedding might remind him of the importance of family unity. Marcus gently removed her hand and replied equally loudly that he valued family greatly, which was why he prioritized people who treated his wife and daughters with respect. Patricia's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Richard appeared and guided her away, murmuring something about greeting other guests. Sophie and Emma stayed close to us throughout the event, noticing the tension even though they didn't fully understand it. When it came time for toasts, Christopher surprised everyone by departing from the traditional script. He thanked his parents for raising him, then added that watching his brother Marcus stand up for his family's well-being had taught him the most important lesson about marriage, that your spouse and children come first, always, and that real love means protecting them even when it's difficult. The room went silent. Patricia stood abruptly and walked out, with Victoria following. Richard stayed seated, looking uncomfortable but not leaving. Several guests who knew the family history exchanged knowing glances. Christopher caught Marcus's eye from across the room and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity and mutual support. We left shortly after, having stayed longer than planned but feeling glad we had witnessed Christopher's declaration of independence. In the car, Sophie asked why Grandma Patricia had seemed so angry. Marcus explained in simple terms that sometimes people get upset when others make different choices than they expected, but that doesn't mean those choices are wrong. It's important to live according to your own values, not just to make other people happy, he told her. In September, something unexpected happened. Richard called to say he was leaving Patricia. Not divorcing, he clarified, but taking a separation to figure out what he wanted the rest of his life to look like. He had rented an apartment across town and was seeing a therapist to work through 40 years of enabling and avoidance. He wanted Marcus to know that watching him set boundaries had inspired Richard to examine his own life and realize how much he had sacrificed for the sake of keeping peace with a woman who was never actually peaceful. The separation sent shockwaves through the Hartley family. Victoria was furious and blamed Marcus for destroying the family. Patricia called Marcus repeatedly, leaving voicemails that alternated between rage and desperate pleas for him to talk sense into his father. Marcus listened to none of them, having learned that engaging with Patricia's emotional manipulation only gave her more ammunition. Christopher reported that Patricia was telling everyone who would listen that her family had turned against her, that her children were ungrateful and cruel, that she had sacrificed everything for them only to be abandoned in her time of need. But he also noticed that some extended family members were quietly reaching out to ask what had really happened, and when they heard the full story, many were less sympathetic to Patricia than she expected. October brought Sophie's parent-teacher conference. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, commented on how much Sophie had blossomed over the past year. "She's more confident, more willing to participate, more relaxed," Mrs. Chen observed. "Whatever changes you've made at home are really benefiting her." Marcus and I exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. The change was the absence of constant criticism and comparison, the removal of an environment where Sophie felt she had to earn love. As we approached the holiday season, we made plans that centered entirely on what our family wanted rather than what was expected of us. We would spend Thanksgiving with my mother and a few close friends. For Christmas, we would start new traditions, volunteering at a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve and spending Christmas Day in our pajamas watching movies and playing board games. No formal dinners where the girls had to be perfectly behaved. No gift hierarchies that highlighted their inferior status. Just joy and connection and unconditional love. In November, Marcus received a letter from Patricia's attorney. She was updating her will and wanted him to know that he and our daughters were being removed as beneficiaries. The estate would be divided between Victoria and any future children Christopher might have with an approved spouse. It was a final attempt to punish Marcus for his disloyalty and to use money as a weapon of control. Marcus read the letter and shrugged. "She can do whatever she wants with her money. We'll be fine." And we were. We had built a life based on our values rather than on inheritance expectations. We had meaningful work, a modest but comfortable home, and relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than obligation. We had broken the cycle of dysfunction and given our daughters something far more valuable than money, the knowledge that their worth wasn't conditional. Christmas morning arrived bright and cold. Sophie and Emma woke us before dawn, excited about the modest stack of presents under our tree. We made hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls, opened gifts slowly while still in our pajamas, and played with each new toy before moving to the next. There were no expensive designer clothes that didn't fit, no pointed comments about how we could afford better if Marcus worked harder, no comparisons to what Alexander received. Just genuine delight in carefully chosen gifts and the warmth of being together. Later that day, Richard stopped by with gifts for the girls and an update. He had filed for divorce. After months of separation and therapy, he had realized he didn't want to go back to a marriage built on his complete subordination to Patricia's will. He was learning, at 67 years old, to have opinions and preferences and boundaries. It was terrifying and liberating.